Hey guys, I'm Allie Covington, and I want to talk about metabolism today. So many people are very confused by how to measure calories, what their body's doing with them, what your metabolism is doing, and it's a very complicated process. And this is why calories in, calories out, and saying live in a caloric deficit doesn't just work like magic. So here's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to make this a really in-depth one. And this is why I work with business owners and high performers who are really after getting exceptional results. So I'm going to actually create a whiteboard here so that you can see a little bit more about what I'm talking about. So I'm going to put up a lot of points today. So for starters, I started learning about this in 1996. This was back when, probably 95, maybe 96. This is back when there were no nutrition labels. We actually had to know how many calories were in different macros, like protein, carbs, and fats. And then the nutrition labels came out, and that made it a little bit more helpful for more people, but it also created a lot of confusion. So what I'm going to share with you today is exactly what is going on inside of your body. So and I'm going to thank a client who just asked me, what's my BMR? What's my total daily energy expenditure? How are you calculating that? And I wanted to answer simply, but there really isn't a simple answer. So I'm going to give you a long explanation for it. BMR, basal metabolic rate, unless you go and have it physically tested in a clinical setting, and it's more than just a VO2 max test and all of that. If you don't have it tested in a very specific way, those calculations are guesses. We are hoping that we're right. And really, it's more of a statistical average. So if you took 1,000 people across a sample size and calculated what you thought their BMR was, and it actually turned out to be right X amount of the time, then we're like, okay, that's a reasonable way of approaching it. And yet we have thyroid that gets in the way of that, cortisol that gets in the way of that, testosterone that gets in the way of that, and mitochondrial function. All of these things get in the way of that calculation. When I take a client and they say, I want to lose body fat, I want to get lean, I don't bother calculating where they are right now because their body has X amount of lean mass and excess body fat that we're trying to get rid of. And if I calculated that today, and then I would constantly be chasing after the puck, right? Because that number is going to fluctuate. Their metabolism is going to fluctuate on our way to getting leaner. But if I calculate for the lean body that they're building, then I'm skating where the puck is going. Is that making sense? So I want to talk about how your body actually views macros, because it doesn't have any idea what a calorie is. That is a man-made construct so that we could try to understand our systems a little bit better and how food impacts it. But what your body does is it looks at macros, the macros that it needs, and then it looks at the ratios that you're taking them in at the same time in relationship to one another. What I mean by that is, let's pretend that you eat high carbohydrate and fat diet, and the protein that you get is mostly plant-based. It's not from animal sources. So you get very little protein, but you get a lot of carbohydrate and quite a bit of fat in your diet. So the carbohydrates are going to be listed on glycemic index, right? When you eat sugar, it starts to digest in your mouth. The enzymes in your mouth start to break down the sugars as you're chewing it. So when it hits your stomach, it doesn't spend very much time there before it's gone. It really doesn't even bother getting into your gut because it's a simple sugar. So you already broke it down. It's in your bloodstream, spiked your blood sugar. And then the macros like fat that you take in with it, those are going to be a little bit slower to get into your bloodstream, but it'll still get there pretty fast out of the stomach. Most of what actually makes it into your gut is plant matter, plant and fruit. So all of the fiber that we take in from vegetables and fruits, they have cellulose cell walls. We really cannot break those down. And what that means is the spinach, the corn that you're eating, even though on the label it tells you how many calories it has and how many grams of carbohydrate it is, vegetables like that are actually a net negative because your body uses more energy than those foods could possibly give you in order to be able to try to break it down, only to end up failing at the end of the day, and it's eliminated out of your body almost as whole as it was when it went in. Just have some corn and then tell me the next morning that didn't look exactly the same. So then let's pretend you try a medium protein diet, but a high fat diet with no carbs. Okay. There, your body is going to get some more protein. You will, because of the zero carb, and there's no energy that you're getting from that, you're only using fat as your fuel source for energy. Your body is going to drop excess body fat. Now, if the more excess body fat you have, the faster you will drop it until you get to a certain point. But those types of diets, the first one I listed was vegan. You don't get into the teens of body fat that way. It's very difficult to do that. You've got to do some extraordinary measures. You've got to build up a lot of muscle, and that's going to be a little bit more difficult to do if you don't have adequate protein and you have really high fat. Now, is that helpful for children with seizures, adults with seizures? Yes. I tried to get my son into ketosis when he was going through his seizure treatment. And the high fat amount, he couldn't digest in his stomach. And so he would vomit his food back up. So it doesn't work for everyone. You can have too much fat for your body to be able to digest. So let's pretend that you said, okay, I'm going to go have a high protein and fat diet, medium fat and no carbs, carnivore. Your body is going to be able to put on more muscle mass and be able to take off body fat. And it's going to be used to churning through its own body fat because it has zero carbohydrates. Now, is that going to be the way that you want to be an endurance athlete? It's going to take a long time of adaptation in order to be able to do that. So if you were an athlete going into a carnivore diet, like that's going to make a difference. If you were starting to become an athlete because carnivore really fit your lifestyle, and so you wanted to lose some body fat, and then you realized, I need to do some cardio too because that's good for my health and my longevity. You're not going to feel as much energy for it without the carbohydrates because your body was used to burning sugars. Is that making sense? So you'll get a more muscular looking body with a little bit less body fat, but at the end of the day, the amount of land animal fat that you consume is going to dramatically dictate how lean your body gets. So bodybuilders, and I started studying that in 1996. When I was prepping for my first competition. When a bodybuilder is off season, they're in the teens generally. When they're on season and they're really cutting, they cut out land animal fat altogether. Now, why would they do that? Because we are land animals. And our bodies want to use land animal fat as a fuel source right behind carbohydrates. So they also restrict carbohydrates, right? And so they're left with lean proteins to build muscle. Now, here's the most important thing I want you to get from all of this. Protein is it's the only macro your body can live without. It cannot live without protein, adequate protein. If you do not get enough protein in your diet every day, your body will break down its muscle tissue to use for things like cell membranes and DNA and things like that. Your entire body runs off of amino acids. It is the most important thing that you get. Now, when it comes to appetite and satiety, if you don't get enough protein, even if you eat carbs and low fat, if you don't get enough protein, you're going to constantly be hungry. You're going to constantly feel like I need to eat. And carbs are what we tend to go for because they're simple and they're easy and they're easily digestible. So we get a little quick energy burst from them. But what your body is actually craving is protein. So over the last 30 years, since I've been training and learning all of this, what I've done is create calculations for where we want our body to actually end up. So rather than try to chase your metabolism all over the place, because it's all over the place. It's an ever moving puck around the ice rink, so to speak, because you have all of these factors that contribute to it. You've got gut health. Is it dysbiotic? Are we digesting our food properly? If it's dysbiotic and we have high anxiety or high stress work life, then we probably are secreting more cortisol, and that cortisol isn't being taken up properly. And because that cortisol isn't being taken up properly, then we can start to apply belly fat because those fat receptors have more cortisol receptors in it. And I'll give you an example of where hormones really matter. But let's pretend that everything is equal and everything is working optimally. Hormones and everything are working optimally. Then depending on where your body is at in terms of metabolism, if you burn 500 calories a day in your workouts, then you should burn about a pound of fat a week. So that always works out perfectly for my clients when they're eating for where their body is going. If you're eating for where your body is at, then you're probably not going to burn off that much in that week. You might burn off more in the beginning because there's a bigger caloric deficit. But since we don't actually know, and we're just guessing at where your total daily expenditure of energy is at every day, it might be that you have a much bigger deficit, but that deficit's going to shrink a lot as you get closer to your ideal weight or your ideal body composition. So the low protein, high fat, high carb diet is going to apply more body fat to you, and it's going to strip your body of muscle. That's the vegan diet. If you've got the high fat, medium protein diet, you're going to shrink, but you'll be able to build muscle. It just won't be as much as it would be if you were eating more protein and a little bit less fat, like you would be on, let's say, a carnivore diet. So that's why you tend to see more of the carnivore guys being a little bit more muscular. Now, when it comes to my calculations, I separate oil fats from land animal fats, carbohydrates or simple carbohydrates like potatoes and grains and things like that from fruits and veggies. Fun fact, the potatoes you actually do get energy from. So it's not all vegetables that are a net negative, because fruits are probably a net neutral because they have so much fiber and water and not as much sugar as you think. And it's taking energy to break down the fiber, or at least to try to break down the fiber. You're probably not getting very many calories from it, if at all. At least I've never seen anybody get fat eating a watermelon a weekend like I did when I was shredding for my competition 2 years ago. On top of that, protein while it is a net positive, you will get calories from it. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to break that down. And so therefore, you're probably only getting maybe 60% of the calories from protein. So even if you overate protein, you're still not going to get 100% of calories. The only place where you're going to get 100% of the calories is those simple carbohydrates. And then fat takes a very little bit of energy to break down, not a lot, because your body actually does want to use fat, but it wants to use fat behind carbohydrates. That's why it's easy to lose weight on a keto diet, because you strip out its first fuel source. It goes, cool, then I'm going to just burn through all the fat you gave me and whatever extra fat I have on my body. And generally people who are really obese or very overweight have a higher metabolic rate because they're carrying around a lot of weight. So their metabolism is running at a higher speed. And as they strip that body fat off and start carrying around quite so much weight, their body doesn't have to work as hard, so they don't need as many calories. I know, counterintuitive, right? So my calculation, I call like an undiet, because we include everything in there. I want us to be able to utilize fat and carbs as a fuel source, get enough protein for longevity and for good health overall, and avoid chronic disease and have good gut health. I started coming up with this decades ago when I was a bio undergrad, and started to see how at a very cellular level, the body would utilize carbohydrates and fats. Remember, this is before nutrition labels. So if when we were prepping for competitions, we would even say, we're not going to eat carrots. We're not going to eat tomatoes because they have too much sugar, right? Now we understand a lot more about it, but that was how bodybuilding was back then. And when we're calculating, what I'm calculating for my clients, calculating for their lean body composition in the teens. And that's where they're going. So I want to skate where the puck is going, not follow it around the rink. What I've been describing to you is the different way in which your body spends calories, spends energy breaking down the food that you're taking in. This is why calories in, calories out is such an oversimplified calculation, because some things that are considered carbohydrates by the USDA, because they are to fat and they are to protein, like spinach or broccoli, those actually require energy to break down. So that's not giving us any calories at all. Alcohol, for instance, just liquor, bourbon, vodka, it turns into acetate and water. Beer, on the other hand, has maltose. It is higher on the glycemic index than sugar is. So my clients hear me say all the time, it's okay to have a drink. Just don't let it be beer. Please don't let it be beer. Or eat a whole lot of protein with it when you do. So that's the calorie part of things. This is why those calculations on, here's what your basal metabolic rate should be, or here's the calories that you need per day, they're guesses. Just 220 minus your age was your max heart rate. Some smart person was doing their best to simplify a very complicated process that we didn't have enough information on way back when. And in fact, that leads me into my next point, which is hormones and your mental state actually impact your metabolism tremendously. Hormones play a huge role. Here's my experience after having my third child. I was 41 at the time, maybe barely turning 42. And he had been born about 6 months prior. And I hadn't dropped any of the baby weight, even though I was burning 500 calories a day during my workouts, and I was only taking in 500 calories a day. Allie, if you're taking in 0 calories, you had to be dropping weight like crazy. I wasn't. My weight wasn't moving. My pants weren't getting looser. Nothing was changing. So I went and looked at where my testosterone was at and had a scan done and found out that I was very low in DHEA I was only taking 50 milligrams a day. So I bumped it up to the 200 or 250 my body said it wanted. And I started dropping 2.5 pounds a week. Now that's what you'd expect if you had a net zero caloric intake, right? You're only taking in 500, you're spending 500 extra on top of what your body already needs. And I'm on my feet all day taking care of an infant too, running around to doctor's appointments because he was sick. So yeah, then I started dropping 2.5 pounds a week because I needed more testosterone. So that's just one example because the rest of my metabolism was fine. Now, let's talk about what we know now about anxiety and fear and how that impacts our mitochondria, because we actually know the mechanism now by which our mental state, our higher levels of anxiety, not just producing more cortisol that's going to hang around in your gut and not be taken up quick enough. We're talking about like worry, that kind of anxiety that's just lingering in the back of our minds all the time. That actually causes your mitochondria to dump their own DNA and produce cortisol. So what does that mean when they dump their DNA? Your mitochondria are basically committing suicide. I'm out. They can't replicate without DNA because your mitochondria has its own DNA and the cell has its DNA. So we actually don't have any way of measuring to the extent that negatively impacts our metabolism too. So there's too many variables to know where your basal metabolic rate is today, right? Too many factors can swing that. And we don't even know to what degree from a day-to-day basis. So now if everything's perfectly stabilized, hormones are optimized, metabolism is very steady, right? We don't have big swings emotionally. Our gut health is really good. Our digestion is really good. We don't have any acid reflux, heartburn, constipation, diarrhea, bloating. We don't have any of those things. Then yeah, CICO can work. Calories in, calories out would work at that point. Most people have some of that stuff going on. So it ends up not being a very useful tool. But again, it's just a tool. There's a lot of other tools that we need to use in order to figure out where your metabolism really is at. And as soon as we're over 30, especially 40 and beyond, your mitochondria have been exposed to oxygen for a lot of decades through water and air. And that oxygen oxidizes the mitochondria. Think rust. When I say oxidation, that's rust. So the mitochondria are rusting over time. There's a couple of supplements that when in combination, they're just amino acids. They can go in and start repairing the mitochondria. We just have to take them in high enough amounts that we don't usually get it from our food. There's not what our body is busy doing with it. And frankly, most people don't eat enough protein anyway in order for your body to have so much extra that it goes, you know what, I think I'm going to make a little extra of this. I'm going to go repair some mitochondria from it. So it's helpful to take these supplements. But those are the only conditions under which you could confidently say that it's probably working. And then what happens when it changes? This is why fat loss is a bit of a moving target. Your metabolism is a bit of a moving target. How much you move in a day changes. How much you worry in a day changes. No one is a statue. No one doesn't react to their environment. No one sits still all day long unless you're in a coma. Unless you're in a coma, in which case then, yeah, it's pretty steady. But as soon as you get up, hormones start kicking off. You start burning through some calories. You start having some energetic requirements, and the whole calculation goes out the window, and we need to pay attention to the other factors. So this is why I don't do diets. This is why I don't do anything restrictive, because you can always train your body to utilize sugar or even protein as a fuel source. It doesn't want to, but it will turn it into a carbohydrate in the absence of carbohydrates, in the absence of fat, and in the presence of enough protein, which is pretty much what's happening as the bodybuilders get down into their very low body fat. This is how they continue to function. So in case that was a question on your mind, that's how the protein gets converted into glycogen, and they use that in their muscles. And that's not a bad way to go either. I'm pretty sure my body's pretty used to doing that now after 30 years of it. So I hope that helps. Feel free to send me a message, DM, an email, text message, phone call, carrier pigeon with any questions you have. All right. Peace out.